Hello and welcome to this AHDB Cut Flower Centre webinar covering the latest developments with downy mildew control in column stocks. I'm Wayne Brough, AHDB Knowledge Exchange Manager for Ornamentals, and before I introduce the speakers and their presentations, just a few housekeeping points. The audience will be muted throughout the webinar, but you can still pose questions and I'll go through how to pose questions in the next slide. The actual webinar itself will take about an hour, give or take a few minutes. It will be recorded, so if you need to leave or if you'd like to pass the webinar on to colleagues, it can be accessed later in about a week's time on the AHDB website on the archive site. I'll come back to that in a moment. And also there's going to be the handout, the fact sheet, which is referred to within this webinar, and the basis and the ROSO points can also be found in the handout section on the menu, which I'll cover in a moment. So getting back to the menu you should see on your screen, this should be the menu you can see in terms of the GoToWebinar functionality. If you press the red button with the white arrow, it should minimize the actual box to take it out of the way. But before you do so, just a couple of things I need to highlight to you in advance. If you'd like to set a question for the presenters, please click the question row, which is a grey bar there, and a down box will appear into which you can type your question. So please post questions throughout the webinar. I'll keep an eye on them and ask the questions to the appropriate presenter at the end of each presentation. If you would like to download the handout, the fact sheet, basis or NEROSO forms, they can be found in the handout box. So again, click that and then just download the appropriate document which you require. In terms of the basis and NEROSO, please complete those. Maya's email address should be on those. So once completed, please return them to Maya and she can register points on your behalf. As I said previously as well, the recording will be made available next week on the AHDB Horticulture website, and the archive address is given there just for information. So in terms of the webinar program, we've got 2 speakers, 3 presentations. We're starting with Selchuk, who's covering an overview of the regulatory situation for cut flower industry. We then go on to Lyndon Mason, who's covering the output from the CFC program and the sensitivity testing we did in conjunction with Ferro. And then back to Selchuk, he's covering how the results from that work and from the sensitivity testing can be used in commerce to keep crops clean and to improve disease control programs in the future. So in terms of today's 2 presenters, both are well known with industry, but starting with Lyndon. After graduation, Lyndon worked for ADAS for around 11 years before leaving to set up his own business. Since then, he's been an independent cut flower consultant and undertaken a range of work, helping growers to access EU business development funding, supplying a range of young plant material to industry, and undertaking industry-led R&D. Specifically over the last 10 years, project managing the CFC program of work. Again, Selchuk is well known to the industry, having started his career at Derby Nursery Stock as a technical manager before becoming a consultant to the nursery stock industry, then moving on to Certis as their IPM manager, and now he's back as a consultant offering ICM sustainable solutions. So if I can now pass on to Selchuk, and we'll commence with the first presentation covering the regulatory situation in the cut flower industry. Thank you.
My first part of the presentation today is talking about the regulatory situation for the cut flower industry. Just wanted to cover a bit about our market itself. We are actually a very niche, very small market, particularly when we talk about protected ornamentals. And within the protected ornamentals, actually, our cut flower segment is very small, even smaller, down to 172 hectares, according to the latest pesticides usage statistics, which was actually published very long time ago. But roughly speaking, we're about 170 to 200 hectares of cut flowers in the UK. We are also one of the industries or one of the segments within horticulture that we rely on quite a lot of parallel imports, and some of these parallel imports actually do cause concern, and I'll cover some of these a little bit later on. One of the major impacts for our market as a cut flower industry is actually the regulatory framework that we're bound by. So it's something that I will cover in a lot more detail over the next few slides. Now, in reality, obviously, we are talking about approved crop protection product. So to give you a bit of an idea, our crop protection market value as a cut flower segment is approximately £250,000, which is actually very, very minor if you think that the wider crop protection market in the UK is about £1 billion. In terms of regulatory framework, what I will try and do today, I will cover the 5 different approval types and some of their pros and cons. So that's on-label approvals, off-label approvals, commodity substances, long-term arrangements for extensions of use, some of you might be aware of, and also the emergency derogations, which frankly, for our industry, the cut flower industry, we haven't actually had many, if any, for the last few years. But it's worth having those in your mind, because potentially, as our toolbox gets restricted, we could go down that route. The third point that I'll cover today is some of the specifics around the assessment models for ornamentals, particularly for cut flowers. So obviously, is an area which actually restricts our industry from access to very good crop protection products. And lastly, we are in a post-Brexit situation already, so not UK, we are now Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So just be aware of that, and I'll cover some of the approval and renewal processes going forward in terms of changes, as well as mutual recognitions. And as I said, I will touch briefly on parallel imports. So in terms of approval types, the 5 approval types in the UK, I will start off with the on-label approvals. Obviously, if they are on-label approved crop protection products, they give us guaranteed efficacy, they give us guaranteed safety, and of course, we do have the backup of the manufacturers should something go wrong, whether it's phytotoxicity or perhaps some failure of efficacy, etc. We can always resort back to the manufacturers. These products are really rigorously trialed, that they have a specific product dossier, biological dossier that the regulators approve. So they have been tested in so many areas. And of course, often they do come with very clear instructions and guidelines on the label, because they're specific to our industry, the ornamentals. Some of the negatives, unfortunately, there is very few on-label approvals for ornamental segment in the UK, and particularly for cut flowers, because of the huge investment needs for approval on these products required. They can be often very costly if they're on-label approvals, and sometimes, not all the time, but we do get very broad sort of approval. So it says ornamental plant production, and it doesn't really give a lot of specificity of the way it's used and how the gap table is presented. So it could be a little bit vague in terms of information on what the product can be approved and can be used and how it can be used. The second sort of approval type is the off-label approvals. In the UK, we call it EAMU. Before then, it was SOLO and all sorts of other names prior to that. But basically, the cut flower segment in the UK relies mainly on off-label approvals, i.e. EAMUs. These are often very specific users, which is helping us a lot. It gives a lot of detail in terms of guidance, how to use it, use the product, and some additional information. There is also legal requirements for these off-label approvals. We need to obtain digital and printed copy of these product users. So if we are using a product under an off-label approval, make sure you print it, make sure you save a copy somewhere on your server. And of course, the beauty of these off-label approvals is that they come from larger horticultural market segments. So perhaps if we as an industry, as a cut flower segment, are very small and niche. Some of the larger potato segments, for example, are important. So there is a bit of a security where we can piggyback on and secure some of these approvals. So some of the negatives or the drawbacks, unfortunately, EAMU means no testing, means no trials, no results, no data, absolutely very little information in terms of its performance, in terms of its safety. So unfortunately, that then resorts back to growers' responsibility when it comes to using it. Some EAMUs are also only approved just to exploit market potential. So effectively, the manufacturer or the approval holder has maximized its sale opportunity by applying for all these EAMUs. So it doesn't necessarily mean it fits with our production or it has any use. So just we got to be a bit careful when we choose our crop protection products. And of course, there are some occasions where for exactly the same use, there is 2 or 3 EAMUs covering very similar use, and it could be very confusing. So which EAMU number I should be using? Is it 12, 14, or is it 15, 17, etc. So just it's getting a little bit more complex to sort of keep within the regulatory framework with some of these off-label approvals. Commodity substances, within our industry, we do use perhaps 1 or 2 of those. They are very cheap. I mean, the name suggests they are commodities, so really cheap to get hold of. They do provide legal means, because as a commodity substance approved as a plant protection product, that's actually covering our back in terms of being legal, should we be registered with any of the assurance schemes, etc. And often, being a commodity substance, they come with a low risk to us, low risk to our staff and the environment. However, by low risk, I don't mean low risk to the crop. It's just environmental and sort of operator worker safety. Unfortunately, this is where we're starting to see a lot more negative. So very few of those commodity substances are available. Some of them are approved and actually not useful at all. None of these commodity substances come with guarantees, and they're not supported by anyone. So should anything happen, we're basically on our own, and nobody can help us out. So just something to be aware of. And within the commodity substance supply, one thing that we've got to be aware of is that most of these products don't necessarily come in uniform batches. So some batches will be different to others by means of what's in them and how they're formulated. The second to last group of approvals, so long-term arrangements for extensions of use. Well, these have now ended. They ended on 31st of December 2020. So if you ever used and were using products under the long-term arrangements for extensions of use, please be aware you can no longer do that unless you have a replacement EAMU, which AHDB has been working on since 2008, when the Regulation 1 of 2008 became active. And lastly, emergency derogations. Now, these are not very prevalent or commonly found in our segment, in the cut flower segment. However, they do give us 120 days of a specific use for a specific active ingredients. Again, they're legal means of us being able to use a product, an effective product, for the control of specific target. And one of the benefits of emergency derogations is that there is no need for the sought active ingredient to have a registration in this particular country. So it may not be a registered active ingredient in this country. We could look at either Europe or further afield, the States, South America, etc., and we can bring it in. The drawback of the emergency derogation is that it's only for 120 days. And again, it's not covered by any data, any information. There's no guarantees made at all. And we do require manufacturer support. And as a small industry ourselves, that's not always there. And to have a manufacturer support. We really need to sort of work very closely together, which is something that AHDB is doing on our behalf. The process itself for applications for emergency derogations is very complex as well. And of course, often these come with no guidances for use. It will just say the dose rate and maybe even a water volume, and that's it. The rest of it is down to what the regulator will issue as a limitation of use. And obviously, these emergency derogations being so complex, they do require a very high level of expertise for us to be able to bring them into this country. The next sort of part that I wanted to cover really is the assessment models for ornamentals in the UK. Now, we as an industry, cut flower industry, are actually in very disadvantageous position. And that's because the UK regulators assess ornamentals as a very diverse crop segment. So they will ask us for crop situation. So it will depend on whether this is a permanent protection with full enclosure, tunnel grown crop or outdoor crop. They will request medium that the crop is grown in. So it could be inert, inorganic products such as rock wool. It could be compost growing medium. It could be soil. So all these do have an impact on whether or not a product stands a chance of approval. And of course, type of crop, you've seen that my very first slide contained a few ornamental horticultural segments. Now, even within those, so for example, in the hardy nursery stock, there's a raft of different types of crops, but generally CRD will be thinking of pot embedding plants, container grown or soil grown. It will be thinking cut flower. It will be thinking field trees, and whether it's actually foliage, ornamental. So there's a raft of different types of crop that CRD will be assessing some of these active ingredients that we're looking for approvals on. Environmental risk assessment is also very important for our industry. Now, cut flower industry, from that perspective, is perhaps slightly in a better position because most of our crops are in protected glass houses, permanent protection with full enclosure. So that gives us a little bit more security, provided that we can control our environment in a glasshouse situation. So for example, very often if a product comes in with a bee restrictions, it often asks us to close the doors and the vents and make sure the product has dried before we reopen it, for example, as a type of mitigation measure. And the last two there on my slides, you can see operator exposure and worker exposure are the two sort of parameters or models that are really difficult to pass. And that's because of that little section here, 6.1 and 6.2 on EFSA's guidance on pesticides exposure. And if you can see there that it says a transfer coefficient value in the UK, to be able to register a product for cut flowers, you have to have additional data requirements for a number of studies proving that your active ingredient doesn't get transferred by dermal exposure. So effectively, residues or deposits of spray deposits of product are shown that they're not capable of transferring onto the skin and damage the workers and operators. Often that's because it is considered UK cut flower crops are harvested with bare hands, and obviously being a glasshouse situation, anything that's bare will have a higher risk. So very often we're disadvantaged because manufacturers don't tend to generate data to prove that, because their target segments, as you've seen, are either potatoes, arable segment, field vegetables, much wider crop, much more higher value crop protection markets. In terms of operator exposure, we often can mitigate. Operator exposure is in relation of mixing the product and applying the product. So we could mitigate it via perhaps wearing suitable equipment, suitable protective equipment, but also application. So often you will see that some manufacturers choose to approve products where the application of the product is done via gantry system automation. So it's very important that sometimes some of these practices are becoming adopted, which it gives us a little bit more flexibility on what products we can approve with what application equipment. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the challenges of why we're so disadvantaged in comparison to the other segments. It's purely because of the manual handling with bare skin. Post-Brexit situation, I think this is where the unknown comes into this presentation. Unfortunately, there is a lot of areas that we need to have more clarity from CRD, who have been organizing a lot of very useful webinars and guidance documents as well they've been publishing. So unfortunately, this is not the final article at the moment, but we do have an idea of what's going to happen. As I said, we're no longer UK, we are now GB and Northern Ireland, hence why right at the bottom here on your left-hand side, I've included, particularly if there is any Irish growers, please do keep an eye on this, because it depends on whether a product is approved for your country. Down here, just make sure that sometimes if it says GB and no Northern Ireland, obviously the product is not approved, no longer approved for your situation. But one thing that happened, obviously, CRD have told us active substance with an expiry date of 31st of December 2023 will be extended by further 3 years. Approvals of any new active ingredients will remain the same. The process is effectively a copy and paste from Europe, and it continues exactly the same way. And in addition, although it's not so relevant to the cut flower segment, we are actually having our own GB specific maximum residue level database. Some of you might know of mutual recognitions. Now, mutual recognitions were effectively a route to market for us, for UK manufacturers, where if an active ingredient is approved in another European member state, you can bring it in and register it in the UK in a much shorter time space or time frame, and also recognizing whatever the country of origin where the active ingredient is approved and their environmental assessment. So CRD can pick up the dossier and bring it into the UK. So unfortunately, after Brexit, we can no longer do that, but also CRD have left themselves a little bit of a gap, and they've said that actually, if you point us in the right direction where assessments are made elsewhere in other jurisdictions, then we're quite happy to look into it. Basically, I suspect that they're saying make our life a little bit easier. And lastly, in terms of what post-Brexit means for us as a parallel import industry that is usually utilizing a lot of parallel imports, these will expire on 31st of December 2023. Now, some of these parallel imports will have an extension to their use period, so just be aware of this. It's not quite confirmed yet, but 31st of December 2022 is when existing parallel import permits will be ceasing, but there might be a 6-month user period for from grower perspective. So my last slide, take-home messages. We are a really small industry, and we need to be extra vigilant, particularly in times where too many changes are happening in a very short period of time. So just try to raise your game, knowing what's going on. I think we should all recognize also the AHDB research and EAMU programs that we've been relying on for delivery of reliable and approved solutions to protect our crops. It's great to have an independent organization that tests and helps us to secure these products. I should really say that we also ought to pay more attention to our crop protection manufacturers, because sometimes by using those parallel imports, we're not doing ourselves any favor, because we're effectively trying to reduce the interest of the manufacturers to reinvest their funds back into our industry. So just be aware. As I say, I'm not gonna tell you what products to buy, but perhaps it's something that you could consider going forward. And of course, we need to review business activities quite regularly. So make sure you speak to your agronomist over the next couple of months, couple of weeks, whatever that is. But yeah, post-Brexit situation must have an impact on majority of us, not just from trading perspective, but also looking at what our markets and what our businesses need to do in addition to anything that we were already doing. I think that's the end of my first part of the presentation. I don't know if there is time for any questions, but I'll hand back over to Wayne.
Thank you, Selchuk. Just a quick apology to everybody. I lost connection during the introduction, so I'm afraid you probably only saw a frozen screen. Just to remind people, just one quick reminder, if you'd like to pose questions to the speakers, please go to your menu bar, click on questions and pop the questions in the box. Submit them throughout any part of the webinar. I'll keep an eye on them and pose questions to the speakers. If I can just ask Selchuk one question about his presentation, please. With regards to operator exposure and also worker exposure in the main, I guess, will we see going forward cut flowers actually physically restricted, I guess, from labels specifically, yes, as part of ornamentals, whereas perhaps other ornamentals you can still use products on?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is already a couple of examples actually of active ingredients where the manufacturers have chosen to exclude cut flower industry or the cut flower segment from their off labels and on labels, simply because the transfer coefficient value for the cut flower industry is so high. I think it's a coefficient of 48,000. So a multiplication factor of whatever the exposure period is and the data times 48,000. So often this is where we're failing. So going forward, unless we start raising our game and supporting manufacturers and showing the attractiveness of our industry, which I think we do have as a high value crop, I think we will see a continuous sort of disadvantageous position for our industry, because manufacturers will choose not to reinvest their money into this segment. So because of those transfer coefficient values are so high, it will take quite a lot of investment from manufacturers to secure that data. So yes, unlikely that anything will improve going forward unless we do something.
That's unfortunate, but thank you for that, Selchuk. If I can now ask, if we could now pass over to Lyndon, sorry, and just ask Selchuk just to sort of close his mic and webcam. And Lyndon will be talking about the output from recent cut flower centre work on sensitivity testing and other trials with downy mildew on cut flower column stalks. Thank you.
Okay. I'm hoping, Wayne, that everything is okay and everyone can hear and see my presentation. First of all, thank you, Simo. Certainly some sobering facts and figures in that presentation, and obviously a lot to think about for the future. I'm now going to bring us back to a more specific crop, which is cut flower column stalks, and like I say, the issue of downy mildew. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background, because I noticed that not all of the attendees are actually column stock growers. So I'll just give you a little bit of background as to where we are now and how we got here. So first of all, I think column stocks are the most important non-bulb protected crop grown in the UK. Very important spring and an early summer crop. Give or take a few, there's about 15 million of them planted annually. I suspect possibly a few less last year because of COVID, and possibly a few less this year. Farm gauge around 4 million. So in cut flower terms, it's quite an important crop. They do suffer from a number of diseases, including fusarium, which we've done quite a bit of work on, sclerotinia, and of course downy mildew, which is the subject of this webinar. Downy mildew has been managed relatively easily in the past using a metalaxyl-based spray program. That's one of the last crops that we have been able to rely quite heavily on it. But this all changed in 2018. Now, I know probably the growers amongst you won't necessarily want to be reminded of 2018, but I think it's important to just reflect on what we did and where we've got to now as a result. Basically, early in the year of 2018, we started getting reports that the Dutch column stocks were suffering from very severe downy mildew infections. Not surprisingly, this came over to England, and by mid-May, some of the UK crops were also showing very severe downy mildew infections. I think one weekend in May, I got 3, if not 4 phone calls from some of the larger growers in the UK, quite concerned about what was going on. So it almost came in overnight in one weekend. It was quite clear that the usual fungicide program was not working. Even when the spray interval was closed up and reduced, it wasn't doing any good. Pretty clear by the time we got to June that the industry had got a serious problem. And we were actually looking at huge losses due to downy mildew, as they'd already experienced over in Holland. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we did was got the industry together. So in conjunction with Francis, we arranged a meeting at Ian and Phil's nursery and got most of the UK stock growers together to actually openly discuss and explore the problem we've got. It was pretty clear that most, but not all, but most growers were experiencing similar problems. And it was agreed that we need to do something about it fairly soon. And the route we decided to take initially was that the CFC would undertake sensitivity testing using a range of fungicides to obviously try and determine which ones weren't working very well and which ones we might add into the programme. So I took samples from a number of crops, some in Lincolnshire, some in Norfolk, some in Cornwall, some in Northern Ireland. So we had a pretty good spread throughout the country. And actually we had one from Holland as well, which came about as a result of me being on the nursery when some infected crop was being unloaded. So we had a good sample of a good representative sample that we could send off for testing. Got there in the end. So what did we find? Well, actually, Simo's going to cover this in much more detail, so I'm really only going to cover the headline summary, and a lot more detail will come from Simo. The main finding, which was perhaps not surprising, was that all of the downy mildew isolates were not controlled by metalaxyl, which, as I explained earlier, was the mainstay of the current spray program to date. So if that wasn't controlling it, it's probably not surprising that we were getting problems. But the good news was that there were other fungicides in the sensitivity testing that were actually working quite well against this strain of downy mildew, even though we weren't currently using them in the program, especially those that contain dimetamorph. Okay, so it was obvious that this downy mildew was a more tolerant strain, but unfortunately, because of the morphology, it wasn't possible to identify it specifically. Obviously, we didn't have a sample of the old downy mildew as a baseline anyway, but I think it was fairly clear that something in the genetics had changed. It was also clear that we needed a new spray program, and this spray program needed to take into account the findings of the ferrosensitivity testing and bring in new chemicals. Simo came in here, helped us out, great help to actually put forward new proposals for spray programs. And Simo and I and Wayne together developed this technical note, which I hope that you've all seen. It was issued in 2018, and it's on either the CFC website or the AHDB website if you haven't already seen it. But certainly it's a very good reference point and gives some good information for this particular problem. So a quick update, like I say, that was in 2018. In 2019 and 2020, I think the new program has kept it under control. Obviously, I've not visited that many nurseries in 2020, but in 2019, we saw a little bit of downy mildew, but not much. and I've not heard many reports in 2020. We also did additional sensitivity testing in 2019 in conjunction with the larger AHDB downy mildew project. This unfortunately was suspended in 2020 owing to COVID, but will start again in 2021, i.e. this year. Basically, that sensitivity testing showed that we got similar results to 2018, i.e. the same ones were tolerant as before and the ones that were working were still working. So at that stage, it showed that the spray program that we put together in 2018 was still applicable and could still be used and was working. However, there are question marks over how long we still have access to some of the current fungicides that's in that program, but there are others that we might be able to add to the program in the future, so there is hope. And to cover that in more detail, I'm now going to pass over to Simo. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon. Before we do, just to remind people, if you want to download the technical notes straight away, then I think it's also along with the handout and along with the basis and Neroso, you can find it in the handout box. So if you click the handout box, have a look in there. Please download anything you want. The Neroso and basis forms, if you can complete and send back to Maya, and she will register on your behalf. But the fact sheet and the handout should be in there as well. Sorry, Simo, back to you.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Lyndon. Well, I will cover some of the highlights of the testing and also perhaps what the future disease programs could look like. As Lyndon said, there are some concerns over potential losses, but I'll cover those and also have a review of some really exciting new products that are coming through in the pipeline. So first of all, most of you who would have looked at the fact sheet that we've generated in 2018 would have seen this table, but really I'm not going to go over everything. Just wanted to say that in 2020 we actually gained an approval for a product called Runman Top Cyazophamid, and I've added it here. This is the third line, and most importantly, the one column that I'd like you to pay attention to is really that one on the very right hand side called resistance risk, and that's because if you look at the very bottom of this table, you've got two active ingredients or two FRAC codes called M03 and M05, which is effectively M stands for multicide, and they're classified as low risk. And unfortunately, we've already lost chlortalonil, which was one of the actives in a product called Folia Gold, one of my favorite products, in fact, when it came down to downy mildew control, because it gave us a lot of confidence in terms of anti-resistance management. The second one also is called Mancozeb, and that was found either on its own in some products, but also in Fubol Gold. Perhaps Fubol Gold was the standard treatment a few years ago. And as I said, those were the sort of very few, the two FRAC codes which were really important to us as part of our anti-resistance management program. So at the moment, we've lost chlortalonil. There are some concerns over Mancozeb, and also we've lost another active ingredient, which was Phenomenal in the Phenomenal product, and also phosphatal aluminium, although phosphatal aluminium is now present in Previcure Energy, or has been for a while, but obviously the product brand itself was withdrawn out of the market. So although we've lost some and potentially there's concerns over Mancozeb, we still got quite a good range of FRAC codes that we could build our programs. I've also put this table just to show you where we are now in terms of products, and please bear with me, this is not the exhaustive table. There are one or two other active ingredients, but it just gives you a flavor of the number of applications and products that we've got available currently to us, and also some of the active ingredients within that. So if you look at some of these, as I say, we've just added Ranman Top, which actually, for those of you who haven't used it or haven't seen it, please do check the off-label approval. It's 2 blocks of 3 applications maximum. There is some other restrictions there as well, which as an industry we should all be aware of. So please do pay attention to the approval details. I've added the approvals and their numbers for you here just in case, so you can download those at your leisure. So yeah, I mean, effectively, we are still looking good at the moment in terms of products available to us and options that we can build our resistance management programs. However, if we stand still, if you look at 2020, we had 37 applications, and I've put the asterisk there because it's in relation to the number of applications per crop per glasshouse. So some of you might question me on that one. But we did have 10 frag codes and 10 products. And if we look right at the far distant sort of 2023, or maybe not so distant 2023 for some of us, where potentially question marks over the renewal of mancozeb, it's been withdrawn in Europe, although we might have it a little bit longer for the UK, and this is where the unknown comes in. We may see GB either following Europe exactly the same or actually extending it further. But at the moment, I don't want to speculate. I think for the 2021 season, we will certainly have it. The 2022 onwards is uncertain. And likewise, there is some question marks over dimetamorph. However, as I said before, I don't want to speculate. It's too early to talk about these, but there is obviously high risk with these 2 active ingredients, which I've highlighted. But an area of attention that I wanted to bring to is actually the number of products. So if you look at 2020 here, we've got 10 products. Actually, by 2023, we've halved them. And we only have 7 frag codes, of which, if mancozeb is withdrawn completely from GB and Northern Ireland, obviously we have no multisides that we can deal with, that we can include in our fungicide programs. So Lyndon talked about our testing. We had included in the first round of testing a number of products, including products that some of you might question, such as Signum. Why is in there? Signum was obviously included just to ensure that the trial was carried correctly, almost like a positive or a negative, negative treatment that shows that SDHIs have no impact on oomycetes. The key messages from the first testing was that Parat, dimetamorph, Revus, and Percos were the 3 key products that we have in our armory, and those were the ones that we then built our programs in 2018 and also included in the fact sheets going forward. Phenomenal and Previcure Energy were assumed to rely on the phosphonate component. So again, coming from phosphatile aluminium, both in Previcure Energy and Phenomenal. And of course, obviously there is a clear issue with metalaxyl, which is subdue here. As you can see, it gave us absolutely no control whatsoever. Similarly, we have also included at the time a coded product HDC F253, and that's why it's coded. But since we've gained an approval for it, Ranman Top, you can see it here. We were having very high hopes that it will actually deliver some sort of relief of pressure. But unfortunately, as you can see there, obviously that has some concerns. If we go to the second lot of testing, so that was slightly on a later date, which is where we've included the English and the Irish, if I can call it that, strains. And we've included a raft of pipeline products. So what we can bring in as a option for us in the future, should something happen, and knowing that some of these active ingredients were at risk. We actually identified some really good products. Initially, obviously, we discovered that the Irish strain was more sensitive than the English one, which meant that the Irish growers could potentially control it slightly easier, perhaps. There was a clear efficacy from HDC F260, which is this column here on the left, and then the other products, coded products, HDC F254 here on the right. And of course, we were still delivering quite good efficacy from Parat, and also there was another product coded, which, although it may seem a low efficacy, HDC 259, it is a new active, and it could potentially give us another option for tank mixes, and I'll cover these a little bit later on. It was also very interesting that F253 Ranman Top, just here, as you can see it there, didn't perform again. So we were pretty confident by that stage that Ranman Top also had some resistance or tolerance issues. I'm not going to talk too much about some of the other coded products, because as you can see, the level of performance is very low. Very disappointing to see Infinito not performing. It's a very good potato blight product, as are 256, 257 and 258. So I had very high hopes for these products. Unfortunately, they didn't perform. But I think the F260, F254 and F259, those three products gives us some really good confidence, and I believe AHDB are pursuing EAMUs for some of those already. I think, what can I say about the coded products? F254 is a product of two actives. We believe that's unlikely to have a future as a mixture. We believe that it's potentially only one of the actives could be approved as a solo product going forward. And if that happens, I think AHDB are in communication with the manufacturer. That could be a very useful option. HDC F259 is actually approved on potatoes already. It has 6 applications. This is where I was telling you it's a single active, and it could be very useful product with mixtures of frac codes P07. So that's the phosphonates, phosphatile aluminium in Previcure Energy, or frac 29 or even 11, the strobilurins. It's a very strong curative product, also protectant. It gives us quite a lot of inhibiting effect to these pathogens, so that gives us quite a lot of protection. The third product, and perhaps this is the most exciting product, the one that gave us the highest efficacy, is HDC 260. It's already approved on potatoes. It's a 2 active ingredient product. It has very long residual preventative and curative activity. It is systemic, so it will move up the plant, so it will give us quite a lot of confidence in terms of application, particularly where the crop is getting a lot denser and we're struggling to deliver the spray solution onto the right places within the crop. And also a very strong antisporulant. It's particularly good on that. It has 4 applications, so perhaps within a glasshouse cut flower crop, that could be very useful. And the beauty of it is that it has 2 active ingredients, so we could actually utilize it on its own without worrying too much about its resistance potential. It has, it has the ability to become the new Fubol Gold, really. And in terms of risk resistance, it's from a medium to a high risk. So again, although it's a 2 active product, it just puts it into a slightly higher risk group. So just be aware of that. Before I go on to talking about pesticides applications and programs, one thing that I hope all the UK and sort of Irish growers will ask themselves is really production planning. Have you got everything planned the way that gives the best opportunity for the plant to grow and perform? Crop husbandry and hygiene, have you considered any of those? These are probably more important than the product choice later on. Environmental management is something that I come across every day. It's the environment that we manage that gives us the ability to protect our crop, and not what we put on as a fungicide. Something that I'm particularly interested in, and that's something that I'll be looking over in the next few years, I hope, plant crop nutritional health status. We've got to realize that our crops we can only protect with plant protection products if they're in good health status. Plant protection products don't revive crops. If your crop is stressed, if your crop is under significant pressure, plant protection products are not able to take that stress away. So very crucial point here. If we do look after our plants correctly, our crop protection products will work better. Application equipment and technologies I've already mentioned, but it's certainly something that I'd like you all to consider, because I've seen all sorts of methods and application equipment over the last few years for cut flowers. So have you got the latest that you could possibly afford, and also are you able to continue to invest in something that gives you more flexibility? But also as an industry, it helps us bring some of these plant protection products that can be delivered via gantry irrigation, for example. And monitoring, how often do we monitor our crops? It is really crucial that we conduct regular, robust, very meticulous monitoring, because with diseases like the downy mildew that we've been dealing with, some of those infections happen literally in less than 3 hours, and the sporulation in further 6. And by the time we put in a cellophane and wrap it up ready for packing, the next morning you might actually see a lot of sporulation already happening in column stocks, and actually ready packed plants products. So plant protection products is important, and the choice and how you position it. However, I always go by the 80-20 rule. So 80% of everything on the left is really where you come to your controlling your downy mildew, and only 20% comes down to the product choice and the program that you implement. The more we go into future, I think the rule will become 90-10. We are losing a number of crop protection products, so effectively the more we do on the sort of cultural control and IPM front, or integrated crop management front, the better chances we stand to protect our crops. So please take this away, 80-20. If you remember that rule, I can guarantee you'll see improvement in your crops. So over to the programs. I'll start off with the early crops. Some of you probably might be familiar with some of these tables. They are included in the fact sheet. Obviously, we've got a 9 spray programs as an example. Please don't take that as the Bible. These are just exemplary. They're nothing special, but it just gives us a nice opportunity to review how we can build and execute our programs in the current situation. I've highlighted phenomena in position 4 and position 8 because we've lost this opportunity. So what would a new program will look like? Quite frankly, we will have to include the HDC F260 as soon as it's approved, and I believe it is being worked on as we speak. So in second position, bringing it nice and early, giving us that antisporulent defense and residual effect, which will give us quite a good period of time of coverage. And in its own right, under the cooler conditions, it might give us a little bit more breathing space, and we might extend our spray program rather than sort of clumping it all at once in a very short interval. Previcure Energy then takes the 4th place instead of Phenomenal, so that gives us a very similar activity for the March timing. And then, of course, in the 8th position at the end of April, when things are starting to get sort of closer to dispatch after the butt break, and that's where we believe F260 could really have an impact, and it will secure any packed product having any potential sporulation in the packaging. So that's probably where the early crop sort of program looks like. I think often with the early crop we have less issues. We're not that much under pressure because of the environmental conditions, and it's the sort of main crops that we're normally struggling. When it comes to the main crop, again, this was the exemplary program. I've highlighted in red. Unfortunately, we lost foliar gold, Phenomenal, and that left us sort of with three gaps in the example program. In terms of what we could do, very similarly, move the 3rd slot of the Previcure Energy and replace it with a 6th slot of Phenomenal. And again, the 3rd slot is where the F260 comes in with a very long residual effect and the sort of protectant and curative activity. What do we do with the next slot? So foliar gold. My choice is still going to be a multi-site. So if we do have mancozeb, particularly for this year, which I think we will, we need to utilize it, because that gives us really a strong position in terms of ensuring that this pathogen doesn't start to mutate and we start seeing some different strain of it going forward. So we must ensure a robust resistance program. And then, of course, HDC F260 comes back again on 9th position. Hopefully, sort of these exemplary programs give you a good indication of what's coming and how these new programs could look like. But I did say F259, if that gets approved on ornamentals, it's a single active that could be used with products like ProPlant, Previcure Energy, or any of the FRAC 11s, so Strobilurins, and perhaps Amistar. This could be a real winner going forward. Although the sort of efficacy of the product itself as a single active was low, it could actually be a very good anti-resistance management tool. And with that, I think I've come to the end of my presentation, and I'll hand over to Wayne, and perhaps if we do have some time for some questions, I'm happy to take any.
Thank you, Selchuk. Just a quick question coming back to Ranman. It's not been available in the UK for that long, so perhaps this is a little speculation. So where do you feel that the resistance has come from with this new product, which is very disappointing, because it's basically a new product to a relatively new product to the UK?
Yeah. In terms of the product in the UK was approved on potatoes, and likewise in Netherlands was approved in potatoes and ornamentals. Now, our suspicion is that perhaps we know the Netherlands potato industry is very advanced, and obviously it's a small country, so our suspicion is that Ranman Top as a approved product on ornamentals in the Netherlands has been perhaps overused and abused, perhaps. So by the time the sort of planting material arrives at us, we are already starting with a plant material that has got some tolerance towards the Ranman Top. So again, our suspicion is that Ranman Top doesn't perform well in the UK purely because we're using it to control pathogen that's coming from the Netherlands, where Ranman Top has been used. So I'd suggest certainly review your situation, talk to your supplier, but Ranman Top must be sort of used with caution. And
in terms of nutrition, do you think there's going to be any changes to to the nutrition program that was in the fact sheet to sort of try and enhance an internal resistance, if you like, to disease?
Yeah, certainly I'd love to. I think at the time when we were writing it, we were a bit pushed for time, perhaps, just because the disease was getting hold of so many large growers and crops that it's something that I don't think I've seen before. So we had to deliver something that we could utilize and help growers to address the issue immediately. So we haven't spent too much time on looking on available information. However, I think going forward, we need to have a look at what literature is out there available, and if there is nothing available, perhaps we need to start looking into our fertilizer program and also the improving the health status of our crops.
Thank you for that, Selchuk. If I can just ask to be transferred to my final slide, I will just wrap things up. So just to sort of say thank you to both Selchuk and Lyndon for the presentations today. You've got a few seconds left if you wish to download the BASIS and the ROSO forms, and also the handout and the actual fact sheet. If you want those, please download those, as I say, now if you can. If you do think of any further questions, please submit them direct to me and I'll pass them over to the presenters over the next day or two if you think of anything. The recordings, as I said, this will be made available later, and I do apologise today for those people, myself included, who've had connection problems to this particular webinar. Look out for future AHDB horticulture webinars. We have one next week on Scepter Plus and robust spray programs, so there's more information there about pest disease control in that. And finally, good luck with the 2021 cut flower season, and I hope this webinar has been useful in terms of optimising future spray programs. So thank you for that, and goodbye.